So, I mean, the Bible was of interest naturally to Jews and to Christians. And you mentioned Samaritans. Maybe we won't speak too much about them on this occasion. But this was sort of done in a way that was isolated or limited to Christians and Jews. I mean, were Muslims reading the Bible at all in a place like medieval Egypt or Syria?
This is exactly the point, because the Islamicate societies in the Arab world especially were divided in communities, and as long as you stayed inside your own community, you had less, I mean, no problems or little problems with the outside world. The problem or the issue arose when you tried to cross the boundaries.
Yes.
Now, was the Bible...
They weren't equal. I mean, Martino, I mean, it's not like they were sort of on an equal stance with each other, Christian, Jews, and Muslims. I mean, Muslims were ruling.
Yes.
So, for example, crossing a boundary by converting to Islam and beginning to read the Qur'an instead of the Bible, that wasn't a problem.
Obviously, yes. Yes, of course. It was a hierarchical society. It was very clear that there was a dominant community and some tolerated communities. And I mean, the point was that you can see it in the positive light. So these communities were really tolerated, were numerous. Probably they were even the majority until the Crusades. In places like Syria and Egypt. But at the same time, there were some juridical aspects, and the treatment was not equal. So, I mean, the spirit is interesting also for us today. The letter, well, I would not advise to try to build a state, a modern state on these foundations.
Yes,
so,
yes.
It depends on, I mean, but the letter, the spirit, the idea itself was pretty advanced for the time.
But to circle back to the question of Muslims reading the Bible in the medieval Islamic world, Egypt or Syria, for example, I mean, is that where boundary crossing becomes an issue? I mean, was it just that Muslims generally had a negative assessment of the Bible, or was it just a practical question that the Bible wasn't available to them, at least easily, practically?
No, I think that there was a theological issue at stake, and it is the fact that according to Islam, the Bible has been corrupted. There are debates how much it has been how corrupted it is, but there are some reservations about its textual integrity. So when it comes to theology or to exegesis, it was not common for Muslims to read the Bible. There are some examples which are worth mentioning, because it was not an absolute trend. And for instance, even in tafsir, so I mean the most Islamic discipline, like there are some mufassirun.
By the way, I'm sorry I keep jumping in, but for those who don't know, tafsir is basically Islamic commentaries on the Quran.
So, for instance, Al-Bikhai in Egypt, or Ibn Barrajan in Al-Andalus some centuries earlier,
Spain,
produced a new kind of tafsir, of commentary, which is called Tafsir al-Quran bil-Kitab, which means interpreting the Quran through the Bible.
Yes.
This was a minor
Very
genre.
interesting. Yes.
It did not become a major trend, but it existed. And what does it mean? It means that these authors were Muslims. So whenever there was a disagreement between the Bible and the Quran, they opted for the Quran.
Quran wins.
Of course. But in many instances, the Quran is simply alluding, as you know very well, because you wrote many books about this, to biblical narratives without entering into details. And in these cases, it is useful to know the history, the biblical history, biblical story, sorry, in order to better understand the Quranic allusions. Usually, the commentators did not access the texts themselves, but they based on popular folklore by Christians and Jewish converts. But you have examples where the commentators accessed the text, of course, in an Arabic translation, which was not impossible to get access to at the time. But of course, this was controversial. But there are...
Because even, I mean, potentially, even if, let's say, some detail about the life of Jonah or Abraham or Moses that a Muslim author finds in the Bible and says, oh, this is really useful, this completes the picture of the Qur'an, which is, not very detailed. I mean, even then, the biblical material, even if it does not contradict the Qur'an, it's just adding something to it. But still, someone else could say, the Bible is completely falsified and completely, I mean, just to give a modern example, for a different reason, I was reading some fatwas about the question of whether Muslims today can read the Bible. And these are maybe extreme examples, but there's a fatwa I read by the famous Saudi Ibn Baz, who I think may die in the 90s, something like that. But he says, if you are sort of a sophisticated Muslim scholar who can use the Bible to formulate arguments for dawah, for basically Muslim mission and proselytism, then it's okay. But generally, like the standard rule should be, if you find a Bible, you should bury it or burn it, not to offend or inflame people's passions, but just to make sure that some Muslim doesn't happen upon it and get confused in his faith because he reads the Bible. Like there's this concern to just keep the Bible out of sight in this fatwa. So, I mean, I could just see in the medieval context, people could think the same way, like this is corrupt and could lead to confusion. Fitna might be the Arabic word, some sort of confusion. So, better just to avoid it.
Yes, behind me somewhere, there is a trilogy of a Jordan or Syrian author of this century, Al-Maidani, I guess, and he presented a trilogy about Islamic Aqidah, Islamic Akhlaq, in Islamic Sharia, and it is considered like a standard manual.
Can I just translate those terms? So it's more or less beliefs or creed. Akhlaq is more ethics, and Sharia is law.
Is law. So, and I looked up the part on Aqidah, so about creed and the relationship of the Quran to the previous revelations, which are theoretically acknowledged by the Quran. And the answer is always like, for instance, the Psalms that can be read today have nothing to do with the original.
The Psalms of David that the Quran speaks about.
And this is even strange because, I mean, if you open the Gospels, then there are real disagreements between the Quranic narrative and the Gospels. So, I mean, it's logical from Muslim point of view that you could argue that at least some points have been falsified. But as long as the Psalms are concerned, or the Torah, I mean, there is really nothing, in my opinion, that goes straight against the Islamic dogma. And in fact, you, Gabriel, have argued that the original position of the Quran was rather to be in conversation with these previous scriptures, which means a dialectical relation in which you criticize, but you also accept. And I think that there is a possibility to develop a Christian-Muslim understanding by, acknowledging that there are many areas in which the two narratives can coexist. Although there are also other points in which we fundamentally disagree, and there's no way to reconcile them until maybe the day of judgment.